Hello and welcome to Capitol Hill. I'm Lyndall Curtis. The prospect of a Medicare-style levy to fund disability care is looking very likely this afternoon. The ABC understands we may see the whole disability package before the budget. What remains unclear is how many previously unpalatable options the government will resurrect as it searches for ways to fund new spending. Joining me to discuss the day are Labor MP Nick Champion and Liberal MP Kelly O'Dwyer. Welcome to you both.
Great to be with you.
Good afternoon.
We'll begin with a discussion of the possibility of a levy.
Obviously, a levy is something stakeholders have been calling for, and have been calling for in the last 24 hours. Whatever option you look at, you have to look at what will give security to people with a disability, what will ensure we have a strong scheme, not just for a couple of years, but for the decades ahead.
The cupboard is bare, and now the government is coming after you for yet more money to fund its schemes. Now, it's just not good enough.
Before we get to the wider debate about budget funding, Nick, the levy was something supported by one Conservative Premier, Campbell Newman. Was a chance missed to take up the idea earlier?
Well, look, I think for decades now we've known that people with a disability have been shortchanged and haven't been given the funding that they need or the resources they need to live dignified lives. And that's something I think that's troubled politicians from all, of all colours. And I think we're now grappling with the very difficult decisions that, challenges that it takes to actually properly fund disability care. And obviously you can't have a scheme that properly gives these people the dignity they deserve as Australians without paying for it. It seems to me that just as disability can touch anybody's life through accident or through birth and can touch any family's life, the idea of an insurance-style levy, paying a small amount to get a large amount of coverage, seems to me to be just common sense.
But if it wasn't a good idea when Campbell Newman was supporting it, why is it now? And do you think it's a good idea?
Well, look, I don't think anybody dismissed it when it was a recommendation by the Productivity Commission. Admittedly, it was the second option, as it were. And I don't think anybody dismissed it out of hand when it was brought up by Campbell Newman. But obviously it's something you want to consider carefully. I personally think it's probably the most coherent way of providing a funding stream to the community and disabled people, and it's probably the best way of reassuring them that they're going to get the care they need.
Kelly, the last coalition government itself was quite keen on levies. I think it introduced 5 that I've counted. If the disability care scheme is one that provides for disability, provides wide coverage, isn't it similar to Medicare, which provides wide coverage for health, and isn't it a good idea to fund it the same way?
Well, you mentioned the previous record of the coalition government, and we introduced a number of temporary levies, and we also got rid of a number of those temporary levies. I wouldn't say that levies are the best way to actually fund your budget, and in fact the Productivity Commission also said this. The Productivity Commission recommended in its review that it ought to be consolidated revenue that funds a national disability insurance scheme. Now, I think everybody would agree that no one wants to see disability played with like a political football, which is exactly why Tony Abbott and the Shadow Minister Senator Mitch Feifel both implored that the government put in place a funding scheme that would have bipartisan support, and it did that by suggesting that we ought to have a bipartisan committee to actually look at how we would fund disability support. This was rejected by the government. I think that was a real shame. The government has decided to go it alone, far from Nick suggesting that the government didn't rule a levy out of hand. It certainly did do that. It ruled it completely out of hand. But now we find that the government, because of its increased spending that we have seen increase by more than $100 billion over and above what was spent during the last year of the last coalition government has now required the government to look at levies in order to cover its increased spending. And this is despite the fact that they have increased revenues as well by more than $70 billion.
Tony Abbott also said today that it should be funded out of general revenue. It's looking, I think, at around $7 billion a year. It's a big slice out of revenue, or would be for a coalition government too, though, wouldn't it, at a time when you would have already lessened the revenue coming in because you're offering personal income tax cuts and pension rises, and you're scrapping a couple of big taxes along the way too.
Well, look, I think, you know, if anybody who has looked at budgets understands that you need to fund your budget out of consolidated revenue. I mean, we don't sort of fund bits and pieces of the budget by different bits and pieces of levies, and I think, you know, the best mechanism is to be able to ensure that you fund what it is that government needs to do out of consolidated revenue. But the reason this government can't do that is because it has increased its spending very recklessly. It has got its priorities completely wrong. You know, instead it has been funding things like pink bats in roofs. We have seen huge wastage through such things as the school halls program, which the government's own independent review said wasted up to, you know, half the amount of money that was spent on the school halls program. So
no,
it's a government that's actually got...
It said nothing of the sort.
It's actually got a government that's got its priorities wrong. We think that the government needs to look again, reassess its priorities. Obviously, disability is an area that does require support. The National Disability Insurance Scheme is something we do support.
Nick, the Prime Minister isn't intending filling the hole left by the revenue shortfall. The government is only funding, isn't it, the holes it's digging itself, the new spending that it's proposing.
Well, that's just not true. And the example that Kelly gives of the schools, our report said nothing of the sort. All of the school improvements in my area have been welcomed and have been good value for money. And that was done to keep jobs at a time of global financial crisis. And if you want to know the alternative, go and have a look at Spain with 27% unemployment. Now, we have got an economy that's growing.
I think you can draw a few other lessons from Spain.
You know, we have a growing economy, we have a AAA economy, we have a low unemployment compared to the rest of the world, and we have low inflation. Now, we are grappling with a high dollar, and that's because we've become a currency of renown, a currency that people want to buy into, and so this country's problems are different to the rest of the world. Disability care involves a whole lot of additional resources going to people with disabilities, and it wouldn't matter whether you're implementing it now or whether you implemented it during the Howard era, you would have had to have found additional revenue to fund that additional resource going to disabled people. And you can't pretend that there's some sort of magic pudding where you can cut taxes, run a budget surplus, have a large disability program put in place and promise the world to people. The coalition are spreading, are just giving people rainbows to chase after, and we're trying to be, I think, give people a coherent plan for the future for funding this very important program.
Well, Kelly, you in fact talked about the role of government in a piece you wrote for the Financial Review this morning. You said there needs to be a debate about the role of government, and you raised the question about the extent to which government should redistribute wealth beyond just simply the social safety net. It's a question for both sides of politics, isn't it, with debates about where and when means testing should cut in, how much governments should look after people or should give money to people who are able to look after themselves.
Well, I think it is an important debate to talk about, whether or not government should be the default response to all issues that might arise. And I think that increasingly is something that we have seen occur in more recent times. I think there is also a very serious question about whose roles and responsibilities are the various different roles and functions of the different levels of government, because we have also seen significant increased duplication occur between local, state and federal Commonwealth responsibilities.
Doesn't it raise the question, when you look at coalition policies, of something like the paid parental leave, of whether that should be offered to women who earn $150,000 a year to replace that salary?
Well, we've explained our paid parental leave policy. We've said that we believe in having a fair dinkum paid parental leave policy that ensures that women are actually paid at their actual wage rather than the minimum wage.
Isn't that a little beyond what could be termed a social safety net?
Look, just like other workplace entitlements. But I think, you know, coming back to the point that Nick was actually raising before, he was talking about a magic pudding, a magic tree on which money grows, and he was saying that the government was being responsible. In fact, Wayne Swan himself said in an essay just over the weekend before the Prime Minister delivered her speech yesterday that they had got the big economic calls right here in Australia, and that's at a time when, of course, they had put in place a carbon tax that is a $9 billion a year hit to business. They've put in place a mining tax that, in fact, doesn't really raise revenue, and, in fact, they have linked associated spending upwards of $16 billion. They've increased 29 new or increased taxes during their time in government, and we've also seen them borrow more than $10 billion for a clean energy finance corporation that's going to go to failed projects. I don't think they've got the big calls right.
We might move on now to the question of immigration. There was a Four Corners report last night on conditions, particularly at Manus Island in Papua New Guinea. The opposition was saying this morning that it believed the government was going to move women and children out of offshore detention, move them back to Australia. The Minister, Brendan O'Connor, has denied that, saying the deterrence value of moving all people to offshore detention, or all groups of people to offshore detention, should remain. Nick, are you comfortable with the sorts of conditions that exist on Manus Island and Nauru in those processing centres?
Well, our first option was always a Malaysian transfer agreement, and the Liberal Party opposition can stop being commentators on this issue and start participating in the national interest. They could give the government the powers to enable the Malaysian transfer agreement, and then these people could go to Malaysia, could have work rights there, could have the right to go to school, and could have many other rights. It's a country that many of them have gone through as a transit country anyway. We think that was always our... Well, that was always our first option over and above Nauru and Manus option. Well, the Malaysian transfer agreement was the one that we put to the Parliament, Kelly, Kelly, you and the Greens decided to knock off in the Senate the government's ability to implement its program.
Nick,
you can try and hide from that, but that's the reality of the situation.
If I could just ask you a quick follow-up, Nick. The question I asked was if you're comfortable with the conditions that currently exist for women and children.
Well, look, I would prefer that no woman or child, or no individual for that matter, was placed in, a situation they wouldn't, we would not normally want them to be in. But I would prefer that they don't take dangerous boat journeys either. And we know that there is no, if you like, moral free or easy decision in immigration. We have people who are taking very dangerous boat journeys. And the unfortunate thing is nobody interviews drowned people. Nobody interviews the people who go missing on the high seas. So there's a lot at stake, not just people's comfort or their health, but also their lives. We're trying to prevent people from coming here in that manner.
And that's where we'll have to leave it. Thank you very much, Kelly O'Dwyer and Nick Champion.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining Capitol Hill. Please be with us at the same time tomorrow. Good night.